Zach Taylor expected to speak more around 3 this afternoon. But let's bring in our sports director here, Joe Danneman, to kind of break down what we know at this point and what could come next, as well as what the team is going to do in the meantime. Joe, thanks so much for taking the time here this morning. This is something I think a lot of Bengals fans probably feel like they're waking up in a nightmare this morning.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, Jordan, where this was supposed to be the year that Joe Burrow had everything going right for him to have the runway to get this team back to the playoffs. He was coming off a training camp where he was healthy. He played well in the preseason. And there was an expectation that Joe Burrow, with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins now signed and in Cincinnati for the foreseeable future, was going to lead this team back to the playoffs. And that's why this comes as such a gut punch, because Cincinnati fans have had to deal with this multiple times now, with Joe injuring his knee his rookie year, of course, the wrist a couple of years ago, and now this with his turf toe and what's expected to be surgery, and that will keep him out a minimum of 3 months. Now, Zach Taylor, will talk about that later this afternoon. Taylor is correct that we will carry that live on our air, and we'll get more information from Zach. But as of now, the information that's coming from the national insiders, including Adam Schefter of ESPN, is that Joe will need surgery, and that likely puts him at a timeline of at least 3 months of recovery. And that's the foreseeable future here in Cincinnati at quarterback. And so Joe Burrow not being available for this team and their belief that they can get back to the playoffs, that now falls on Jake Browning, like he did in 2023, to come over and take over for Joe Burrow. But you can understand Cincinnati Bengals fans waking up this morning and getting this information just hits like a gut punch for a fan base that expected to go back to the playoffs with Joe this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe, you had kind of a rare vantage point yesterday. You were on the field when you saw all of this unfold. Can you describe some of the things that you saw in the play and then after? Because initially I think that we were all thinking, oh, okay, it's a broken toe. Maybe that's not too bad. And then it was talking about ligaments, and then we saw the boot and everything. But when you were there on the field, were you able to see kind of in real time how serious this was going to be?
You could see that his foot was stuck in the turf, and it wasn't an ankle injury. It wasn't a calf injury. It wasn't an Achilles, and you were wondering exactly what happened. And then you start thinking about what can happen when a foot is stuck in the turf like that. And defensive linemen are also having the force on top of you or trying to bring you down. And you can imagine the pressure and the force that is on that toe as he's going to the ground. And the fact that he tried to stand up, and you could immediately see the pain Joe was in. And listen, we always say athletes know when something is wrong.
Yeah.
And you could see right away that Joe knew something was wrong. And the fact that he was trying to leave the field under his own power to go back to the locker room and couldn't make it and needed help from the trainers, you immediately knew something was different. So we saw Joe come out of the MRI room, that he was on one of the scooters that would keep his leg propped up. He didn't have any weight on his left foot. And you're right, we saw him on crutches with a walking boot. And we first reported that this was going to be turf toe, that there was ligament damage to Joe. And the idea was, what grade was it going to be? Because there are grades to this, Jordan. In fact, San Francisco's quarterback is currently dealing with this, but it's a lower grade injury for him, so he's only expected to miss weeks. But Joe has what's believed to be grade 3, which is the most severe of turf toe injuries, with the ligament damage that can only be repaired with surgery, and that's multiple months. And again, that's what we're expecting Zach Taylor to talk about today, is that Joe Burrow is likely to go with surgery and likely now to miss several months. That would put them towards the end of the year. And then you got to see where the Bengals are at that point, right, Jordan? Because if there's only 3 or 4 weeks left in the season and the Bengals are very much in this and Joe is recovered, then you can put him back out there. The question is, will Jake Browning be able to keep this team afloat?
Right.
That if Joe Burrow's timeline does bring him back in mid-December, would they put him back on the field to try to get this team over the hump and back into the playoffs?
And let's talk about Jake Browning really quick before we let you go. Obviously, we've seen him perform before in high-stakes situations. 2023 came around and he was able to carry, the team, they were able to get some wins there. Yesterday, obviously, them pulling off the win. Do you think that now equips Jake Browning better for this type of, long-term fill-in, if you will, having all of that let's call it practice back in 2023 when Burrow was out for his wrist. Do you think that Jake Browning, I should say, is going to come back out now and be able to carry the team? I mean, we have Vikings, the Broncos, the Lions. This is a stacked couple of weeks here. How do you think that Browning is going to be able to handle it?
That's the hard part, is the schedule gets very difficult starting right now with games that, even with Joe on the field, were going to be hard games to win for the Bengals. But certainly the experience he had in 2023 when he started 7 games and won 4 of those 7 games has to give him confidence that he can go out and lead this team to play winning football. But I think what's more important, Jordan, is the fact that Zach Taylor believes in him, that locker room believes in him. That's not fake.
Right.
We get it. He's not Joe Burrow. There is nobody that is Joe Burrow. But Jake Browning does give this team the ability to play winning football and believe they can win without Joe Burrow. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, guys that are paid big dollars to help this team win, now have to help carry this team to wins going forward. And Jake plays a little bit different style than Joe. He pushes the ball down the field more. He takes more chances. It's very entertaining football. You saw yesterday, it can be adventurous. It can be a roller coaster. There can be mistakes. But I don't think it's fake when you hear guys like Jamar Chase, and I spoke to Chase Brown yesterday as well, and even Zach Taylor, that these guys have confidence that Jake can keep them afloat. And that will be the question the next 10, 11, 12 weeks. Can Jake Browning do enough to keep this team in the race so that if Joe and the timeline is 3 months, that they get to mid-December and Joe is ready to go, that they put him back on the field? That's going to be the question the next 10 to 12 weeks. Can Jake Browning win enough for this team that if Joe Burrow is ready, they put him back on the field?
And final question for you here, Joe. Any word yet about Shamar? We saw him go out shortly after Burrow was down. Any word yet on his injury?
So it was an ankle knee injury for Shamar, and like Joe Burrow, he was needing crutches to get around in the locker room. The early word on Shamar Stewart, and again, this will have to come from Zach Taylor a little bit later today, but the early word is that Shamar Stewart has avoided major injury, and it's looking more like a week-to-week kind of injury that could put him on the field sooner rather than later. So as of this morning, while the news isn't good for Joe Burrow and the expectation he needs surgery, the news is better for Shamar Stewart this morning, that it's more of a week-to-week kind of injury, and he avoided major injury. But again, that'll be questions we ask for Zach Taylor a little bit later today at a scheduled press conference.
Sports Director Joe Danneman, thank you so much, Joe, for taking the time here with us this morning. And again, throughout the day, we're going to stay on top of updates, but we appreciate you taking the time here on the Morning Extra. Now, again, Zach Taylor not giving an update on Burrow's injuries after the game. Of course, that was several hours ago now by this point, but we're all really still waiting for more information to be confirmed. Zach Taylor, again, expected to speak today. Our sports team, you just heard from Joe Danneman, they're going to have full coverage for you once we learn more about number 9. We're going to bring it to you right here on the Bengals flagship station.